Sweden, it seems, is finally closer to joining NATO after hours of frantic diplomacy. The Turkish president has been blocking Swedish membership for 15 months. And just hours before arriving here, he added a new condition. He told reporters he was linking Sweden's bid to join NATO to his own country's long-stalled application for EU membership. Talks between Turkey and Sweden went on for hours. At one point, they were paused so President Erdogan could have a meeting with EU Council President Charles Michel, who promised new and enhanced engagement with Ankara. Then, late in the evening, the NATO Secretary-General made this announcement.
I have just had a constructive meeting with President Erdogan and Prime Minister Kristersson. I'm glad to announce that as a result, President Erdogan has agreed to forward the accession protocol for Sweden to the Grand National Assembly as soon as possible and work closely with the Assembly to ensure ratification.
In addition to the eve of summit talks on Sweden, behind the scenes there have been frantic negotiations on what NATO leaders should say about President Zelensky's demands that his country be given a clear and concrete path for it to join the alliance. The recent decision by the Biden administration to send cluster munitions to Ukraine has also been the cause of much unease among allies, 2/3 of whom have signed the international treaty banning their use.
Well, let's speak to our diplomatic editor, James Bays, who joins us now from Vilnius. James, as you were just reporting there, unity is key, but I understand it's not clear if Zelensky will show up, which would be quite the statement.
We think Zelensky will be here. That is certainly the word from the NATO Secretary-General. He had put rumblings in there that perhaps he wouldn't show because he wanted a very clear commitment from the NATO leaders that Ukraine will be able to join NATO. Now, he knows he's not going to get an invitation. He's not going to be invited to join NATO at this summit, but he doesn't want it just put on the back burner. He wants a clear path ahead. Now, this has been a problem for the 31 NATO allies. Of course, there's also Sweden, which is the 32nd, maybe, but not yet joined. They have been trying to work on some agreed language that will go in the final communique on what to actually say to Ukraine about its membership. Now, they've been going back and forth on that language. When I was in Brussels at Thursday and Friday last week, they thought they were very close, but in fact negotiations have continued. They've continued here in Vilnius. They've continued in the last few hours. They've still had meetings, but the latest I'm told is the ambassadors have come up with what I think is a form of wording that they think will pass the test. I'm told there might be some I's to dot and some T's to cross, and the final decision will actually be made in the first meeting of the leaders. When the leaders meet, it's called the North Atlantic Council. That's the governing body of NATO, all 31 nations around the table, and they will look at this language that's been written. We've seen various drafts and heard about various drafts of some of the phrases. For example, Ukraine's rightful places in NATO, or Ukraine's future is with NATO's. Mm-hmm. Those are the sort of phrases that have been there, and they really care about this exact language because President Zelensky cares about this exact language. I'm also hearing it's likely that they will skip part of the normal process, a membership action plan. That's rigorous conditions that you're supposed to go to before you get NATO membership. It looks like they're going to allow Ukraine a slightly different path into NATO, but I don't think any of these allies think that Ukraine can join while there is still an active war going on.
Mm-hmm. Still, James, expansion imminently, clearly on the cards. A win here for Stoltenberg when it comes to Turkey.
Yeah, but Stoltenberg's been speaking in the last few minutes because everyone is watching this very, very closely. Exactly what was agreed, what did President Erdogan get from the EU? Of course, NATO says the link between the membership of the EU of Turkey and Sweden's membership of NATO are not linked, but there were meetings that took place. One meeting was paused for the other meeting to take place. So certainly in terms of the choreography of the schedule of meetings, they have been linked here in Vilnius. He said in the last few minutes, I'm absolutely confident we've now solved the main issue, that there'll also be ratification in Turkey. I'm going to add a bit of caution here because they thought they'd solved the issue a year ago at the summit that took place in Madrid, and then there were fresh problems at that stage. And as Stoltenberg has made clear, ratification still has to take place by the Turkish parliament and, interestingly, also by the parliament in Hungary, because Hungary said it wasn't going to ratify until Turkey did. So there's still some steps to go, and there's still, I think, potential for some problems. It's also interesting that we've heard nothing in terms of an official statement from the Turkish side at this point.
Our diplomatic editor, James Bays, there at that NATO summit for us in Vilnius with all the latest. Thank you very much, James. Well, if it does happen, the military alliance will further bolster its presence in the Baltic Sea after Sweden's accession. Paul Reese reports now from the island of Gotland on the Scandinavian nation's year-long membership bid.
The Swedish flag has flown on the walls of Visby for centuries, symbol of a once warlike nation that has remained neutral for the past 200 years. That neutrality is now effectively over after Turkey gave the green light to NATO membership. As politicians and diplomats arrived in this medieval city on the island of Gotland this month, high on the agenda was what Sweden could bring to the table as a member of the military alliance.
What we now start to see actually is the contours of a new security architecture in Europe. Sweden is part of that security architecture, and I would argue that any crack in this system, which is now slowly being formed, is dangerous. Any antagonist can, of course, use this crack.
With that crack sealed, NATO now has a way to dominate the northern seas, with this Swedish territory positioned between Scandinavia, the Baltic states, mainland Europe and the Russian exclave of Kaliningrad. Gotland is a key military asset for NATO in the Baltic, but the Swedes have found many obstacles blocking their path since they applied to join the alliance more than a year ago. Sweden's hopes of joining alongside Finland were dashed when the Finns became members 3 months ago. Turkey repeatedly said it could not allow the Swedes into NATO while protests linked to the PKK were held in Stockholm, and while Sweden's strict freedom of expression laws allowed demonstrators to burn the Quran. Sweden maintained on Monday that it has met and will continue to meet Turkey's conditions, but has remained firm on changing its constitution.
There is nothing in the agreement with Turkey that says that we should stop demonstrations in Sweden. Turkey wanted us to abolish sanctions against export of military equipment to Turkey. This was done fairly quickly, and we have a new anti-terrorist legislation.
Freedom of speech is more holy in Sweden than anything else, so it's difficult to give that message over to Turkey and Hungary. They are prosecuting PKK people. They haven't extradited anybody yet, but they will probably do so.
Sweden once bolstered its campaigns against Russia and Poland with ships and treasure that left the port of Visby. The Swedish flag will still fly here, but now it could be NATO calling the shots. Paul Reese, Al Jazeera, Gotland, Sweden.
Well, to get some reaction out of Turkey now, let's speak to Resul Serdar in Istanbul. Resul, what are you hearing about what finally tipped the balance here for Erdogan?
Well, yesterday, just ahead of the NATO summit, when President Erdogan was about to fly to Lithuania, for the first time, he has linked Turkey's membership to EU with the Sweden's accession to NATO, and that was quite a new element. To be honest, a game-changer element, but it was not clear whether it is a demand, whether it's a condition, or just a proposal or a wish to revive Turkey's membership process. And then we have understood that actually it is a proposal, so trying to encourage the European Union to revive Turkey's membership process. And the sources here, the official sources, are telling us that Turkey has got some concessions, such as the modernization of F-16 fighter jets that was awaiting the U.S. approval, the U.S. Congress approval, and also some of the concessions regarding to modernize the customs union agreement between Turkey and European Union, and also European Union to act in a way that will restrict the movements and the activities of the PKK sympathizers in European Union, and particularly Sweden, and also some of the trade benefits and visa liberalization for Turkish citizens to Schengen area. None of this is is concluded yet. However, they say that European Union and some major members of the European Union have agreed to work in this direction with Turkey, and apparently President Erdogan has seen that as of now sufficient. So that's why, based on that, after the intensive diplomatic efforts between the American and the Turkish authorities, the other major NATO members and the Turkish authorities, President Erdogan has decided to give the green light to Sweden's accession to NATO, and it is quite a big surprise of this NATO summit. And now we're expecting that to come to the Turkish parliament for the ratification soon.
Resul Serdar there for us in Istanbul. Thank you very much, Resul. Well, for more on this, let's bring in Marwan Kabalan. He's the Director of Policy Analysis at the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies here in Doha, and joins us now
Thank you.
in our studio. Marwan, I'm curious, what in your mind changed Erdogan's mind? I know that President Biden gave him a call. Was it F-16s that made all the difference?
Well, I think he tried to make the best out of this bargain from Sweden, from the EU, and indeed from the United States, because the US was very keen on having Sweden admitted to NATO. I think from Sweden, he got more guarantees that they will actually crack down on the activities of the PKK in Sweden. Concerning the EU, you heard that he made this link between EU membership, Turkish membership in the EU and Swedish membership into NATO, but nobody was really sure about whether he meant that, because he will not get it. He knows that Turkey has been trying for the past 4 or 5 decades actually to have the membership in the EU, but he has not been successful in that. And of course, I think he got the green light from the United States actually for having the F-16. And probably he got some concessions, economic concessions from the EU. So at the end of the day, he managed to get
a pretty good deal.
avoid crisis with both the EU and the United States. Especially now, Turkey is facing some economic challenges, and he doesn't want any problems with the United States.
Sure. Well, let me ask you then about loyalty, because we know that Erdogan has a relatively friendly relationship with Russian President Putin. I believe
Absolutely.
Putin's going to visit next month even. This has all been treated with a fair amount of suspicion by other NATO members. Was this a necessary show of loyalty?
I think so. He was trying actually over the past year, since the beginning of the Ukraine war, to strike a balance between his relationship with Russia, because he needs Russia in Syria. You know, these understandings between Turkey and Russia in Syria. And on the other hand, he wants to maintain his relationship, his membership in NATO, and his relationship with the Western camp. So I think he has been so far successful. He tried to give some signals over the past couple of days actually that he is a NATO member. Although he's having good relationship with President Putin, because he said during Zelensky visit to Turkey last week, he said that he's supporting Ukraine membership in NATO, and he freed the Azov group leaders as well. That angered somehow the Kremlin and President Putin. So he was trying actually to have this balance between his relationship with NATO and his friendship with Putin.
So very much the balancing act continues. Marwan Kabalan there, the Director of Policy Analysis at the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies. Thanks so much for sharing your expertise with us again.
Thank you for having me.